Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a cloud solutions architect focused on management technologies. Today's discussion is part 6 of an ongoing series focused on groups as they relate to Intune. And as I was thinking about this session, I realized that I had recorded a session previously back whenever I was thinking about ConfigMgr and all of the cloud options that it had, and specifically how to take ConfigMgr collections and move them to Entra ID groups, Azure AD groups, as it was called at the time of the recording. So I figured I would go ahead and just use that because I had everything set up in the lab already, and it really hasn't changed. So with that in mind, I'm going to shift over to that video for the rest of this session and enjoy. Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a customer engineer focused on management technologies. Today's discussion is part 12 of a series focused on Endpoint Manager, Configuration Manager, Current Branch, and the Microsoft Cloud. This is a part of a series that I actually recorded a little bit ago, but based on the topic today, decided it would be more in line with expanding this series versus doing something else. And so this is part 12. We will have a part 13 as well that will be focused on a different topic, but an important one. So stay tuned for that. But today's discussion is focused on the idea of collections and how they relate to how they can integrate with Azure AD groups when we use Configuration Manager. So let's jump in. Here's the agenda we will use, very similar to all of our discussions. So let's get right to it. So what are we really talking about when we talk about mapping collections to groups? What's the big deal, right? Well, a few things. Being able to manage your Azure AD group membership. But Steve, I can already manage my Azure AD group membership. I have the ability to create Azure AD groups. I have the ability to populate Azure AD groups, either statically or with a query. Absolutely. But you don't have near as much flexibility with your Azure AD group membership that you do with Configuration Manager collections. And so that's the point, is that your Configuration Manager collections can be used to populate Azure AD groups and to basically take ownership of making sure that your Configuration Manager collections are actually replicated to Azure AD groups. I'll show you that, right? So implied it already, but Config Manager Azure AD group integration. And there's some significant opportunity here, right? Let me show this to you first, and then I will give you some examples. And I'm not going to go anywhere deep in this right now, but let me pull in my Intune environment, my Endpoint Manager environment, I should say, and show you what I'm talking about with this challenge, okay? So if we're an Endpoint Manager, we're going to go to groups. Really, if you read our documentation, you will hear or you will see that it talks about going to the Azure portal. And I decided to go to the Endpoint Manager Admin Center instead, because you can do the same exact things in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center as you can in the Azure AD portal. It also makes the point that there are certain items that are in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center that are basically shortcuts over to the Azure portal, and that's certainly the case here. So I'm going to click on groups, right? And if I want to create a new group, easy enough, new group, just need to give that group a name, tell it what type. I'm just going to, again, I'm not going deep here. It needs to be a security group. Give it a name. I'm not going to save it. Give it a description, right? A good question came up when I was talking with a customer about, is there a visual indicator that when you do this, this process to integrate Configuration Manager collections with Azure AD groups, how do you know that a given group is actually being managed with Configuration Manager? And there's really 3 ways, but for those that are purely working in the Azure AD environment, it would be good to either have a naming convention or something in the description to allow folks to visually see, okay, don't touch this group, it's being managed by Configuration Manager, right? Okay, and then the other thing that you need to do when you do this is have it be assigned, but I'm not really there yet. I'm not showing you how to do that yet. So my point of doing this is you can build groups. You can build dynamic user, dynamic device groups in Endpoint Manager Admin Center, which is basically Azure AD, and I can go add a dynamic query. Well, look at the list of properties that are available here, right? There's frankly not that many. Yes, you can go and you can add some rule syntax to get other properties that are available, but they're not in the list per se. A good example of that is in Autopilot. There's an attribute called ZTD ID that you can flag and build a group membership around. It is not in the drop-down list, but you can certainly pull it. But even with that ability to grab these additional attributes, the membership of your groups, the ability to create queries and so on for your groups, is nowhere near as robust as it is in Configuration Manager. So let's go look quickly. Again, no deep dives right now on this, but let's go quickly and look at Configuration Manager. So if we look at our device collections, I'm just going to go pretend I'm building a new device collection, give it a name. I'm not talking about what all this means. I'm just showing it to you, right? And moving on, and then I'm going to add a rule. Well, there's multiple types of rules you can add. The one that I'm going to pick is query to make a point, right? So I can edit my query statement and I can build out criteria for my collection that is as varied as your interests need, right? So I'm just going to hit a starburst. I can pick how I want to build the collection. I can show a tremendous list of attributes. So these are just the defaults, right? Just the defaults that are here natively. There are other things you can add through hardware inventory, through other mechanisms. So literally, the sky is the limit for what you want to do. I'm going to just click on System Resource, and then you'll see all of these properties that come along with System Resource, way above and beyond what's out there for Azure AD, right? And then every single one of the other ones up here, the attribute classes, have their own list of attributes I can choose. So the point is, you can build incredibly robust and focused Configuration Manager collections. You can't do that so much with Azure AD groups, right? But now you can, using this integration that I'm talking about, and that's as much as I'm going to show you here for now. And we'll get back into it in a minute. So let's get back here, right? So I wanted to show you that as the opportunity here to demonstrate the value that's added by maintaining Configuration Manager in your environment, and how Configuration Manager is just as valuable in a cloud-centric world as it ever has been, right? This integration lets you solve the Azure AD grouping challenges that will come up in talking to different customers. There's certain things they still want to do whenever they are targeting and creating groups, and they're often stymied by, well, how do I do this, right? Well, this is a way of how to do it. If you need attributes such as an OU, you don't have that in Azure AD, but you do have that ability through Configuration Manager, or other attributes that you might care about that you need to discover. Again, the sky is the limit with what you can do with Configuration Manager. So in terms of why, we've already given some of that. This is Configuration Manager driven. So if you do integrate between, then what you are effectively saying is, hey, for these groups that Configuration Manager is replicating to, Configuration Manager will become the authority for managing the membership of the target Azure AD groups. Now, does that mean that an Azure AD admin could not go out and manage these groups themselves? Yes, they could. They shouldn't. You don't want them to do that, but they absolutely could. And so just, you'll see in our documentation it says, ideally, Config Manager will be the authority for managing the membership. No. Config Manager will be the authority for managing membership, right? Because if you have any changes that you implement into the group yourself, the next time a full synchronization happens, they're all going to be overwritten. I'll show that to you in a little bit. So whenever we do synchronization between Configuration Manager and Azure AD, we either are going to have a full synchronization, which occurs, if memory serves, every 7 days. I may be wrong on that, but it's a longer interval. Or we will have an incremental sync. An incremental sync will happen every 5 minutes. And so as long as our sync is incremental, then we're not going to force ourselves on the group. We're just going to make sure that the collection members are part of the group. Whatever has been added, changed, whatever in the collection will be reflected in the Azure AD group. But if somehow the group is manipulated manually in Azure AD, then those changes will persist until the full sync. And then when the full sync happens, everything is reset to the way Configuration Manager collection is represented, right? So that's the why. The other why we've already kind of referred to, and that is the ability to bring absolute excellence and full flexibility to your grouping experience in Azure AD, just like you have in collections with Configuration Manager. All right, so what are the requirements of implementing this? Well, they're on the screen. I won't necessarily read all of them, but one thing that I will call out to really, the resources that you have in your collection, in order for those resources to replicate forward to your group in Azure AD, those resources need to be present in Azure AD. Kind of makes sense, right? You're not going to put an object in a group in Azure AD when that object doesn't exist. So it is possible, depending on how you create your collections, that you might have some entries in your collection that are only Config Manager clients. They might not exist in Azure at all. And so those will not replicate, right? The other is to call out that this works in a hybrid environment. It works in a pure Azure AD environment. Whichever situation you're in, then this works just fine. We do need to have Azure AD user discovery enabled and properly functioning, and we need either an enhanced HTTP management point or configured with full PKI SSL. And then there's some others that you see on the screen. So how does this really work? Before we get into configuring it, how does this really work? Well, so I know this is a bit of an eye chart, and the numbers even are a bit of an eye chart, so I made the numbers a little bit bigger next to, and let me just walk you through some of this, right? And I will say that for the first part of this, for most of it, frankly, if you have other cloud presence configured, such as the Cloud Management Gateway or co-management or similar, you've got these precursors already. And even if you don't, it's really pretty easy to set this up. So the first thing, number one, when you're setting it up, then the Config Manager Administrator is going to import and or create client and server apps in Azure AD. So what this means is there needs to be a vehicle, a mechanism by which Configuration Manager can authenticate to and have rights to do things in Azure AD. That vehicle for Cloud Management Gateway, for co-management, for other things that are cloud-focused in Configuration Manager are these client and server apps. It's very likely you might have them in your environment already. If not, we need them, right? And then we can use them to do what we need to do in Azure. Then step number two is we need to run Azure AD user discovery. Make sure that's running, make sure it's collecting the users out of Azure AD. The way that works is it's going to use the server app token to go get that information. And this is a good place to fill in one thing I didn't say, and that is this group membership replication is valid for devices and users. Device collections, user collections can all be replicated to the equivalent in Azure AD. And then number three, we're going to have the site store the data about the user objects that are discovered. Item four will be that the Config Manager client is going to request an Azure AD user or device token, and that's how that device is going to make a connection with the application ID of the client app and so on, right? That's how it all kind of gets replicated. And then item five, the client's going to register their Azure AD information in Config Manager using the Azure AD token authentication method. And then finally, number six up here, when the Azure AD tenant ID information is populated in a database table called the client key data table, then that's when all of this lights up and those entities can be synchronized to Azure AD, right? Why? Because that's how ConfigMgr knows that that device is truly one that lives, or that user is truly one that lives in both on-prem and Azure, so it can be synchronized. And you'll see this more in just a minute. So all of that said, let's actually go through configuring this in the UI part that you need to do, right? So there's two parts, and you'll see these a couple of times. And the first part takes place in Azure. I will do this again in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center because that, frankly, is the same as doing it in the Azure portal, just a little bit of a different way, a shortcut, right? And so when I'm going to go back and I'm going to just go to groups and I'm going to start creating a new group. So you already saw me do this, but I'm going to fill in a little bit more blank. So it needs to be a security group. Don't care the name, don't care the description right now because I'm not going to save these. And then the membership type needs to be assigned. Why? Because ConfigMgr is going to be responsible for replicating its list of devices and or users into this group. And so effectively ConfigMgr is the one doing the assigning of the devices or users into the group, right? And then the other thing is there needs to be an owner assigned for the group. And so that owner needs to be an account that is available in Azure AD and has rights and is also assigned rights in Configuration Manager, right? Okay, so that's the Azure AD part. You'll actually see a couple of groups I created shortly. And then on the Config Manager side, we need a couple of things. We need to go to Cloud Services under Administration and look at our Azure AD tenant, Azure Services. And so we need our tenant listed, and we need, again, Azure AD User Discovery turned on and working. But the key thing we need for this, because those are kind of prerequisites and kind of assumed, is under collection synchronization, you need to turn that on, right? If that's not turned on, then not going to work, right? And then after that, there's really a pretty easy way to set this up the rest of the way, and that's to go to the device and or user collection and pick one. And I'm going to just pick one that I have not replicated. Go to Properties, and then go to the Cloud Sync tab, and then here you're just going to add in what group do you want this collection to synchronize against. Now this is also a good place to say this. You know, when I think about this capability, in fact, I may have even said it, I don't remember, when I did the tenant attach session, I kind of think of this lumped into tenant attach. It really isn't. You don't need to have tenant attach configured to configure this. That's why I'm kind of doing this as a separate session versus lumping it into tenant attach, because they really aren't linked. But really, I kind of see the two as kind of good buddies, if you will, and associated, because I believe there's tremendous value in tenant attach. And this alone is tremendous value that you can bring to bear, that I think every organization that's in Azure should at least be aware of this and know that you can use this because it solves a lot of problems. So I'm going to click Add. And when I can put in a search filter. In my lab, it doesn't really matter that much. In production, it probably does matter a lot more to hone your list of returns. I'm just going to click on Search. And so that's going to go out to my Azure AD environment and pull back a list of devices, a list of groups that I might want to use against. And it looks like it didn't actually pull back. Maybe it did behind. Let's see. Yeah, back here, maybe it's still working on it, looks like. Okay, so there it did. It just took a minute. And so this is an entire list of my groups. Now, I can go filter that list as I'm working in here and decide, right? And so these are the demo groups and so on. So that's how I would associate and hit OK, and that would then start to synchronize. So it's really that simple. It's not hard at all to do this. It's just a matter of getting it done. Right? Now, so that's setting it up. Now, let me show this to you in the way that I have things configured. So back to my cloud environment and my groups that I have created specifically for this demo. All right, groups. And so you'll see two. One is this demo config manager sync 1. Another is demo config manager sync 2. So if I go to sync 1, and I look at the details just quickly, you'll see that I do have an owner assigned. And if I look then at membership, we'll see any members that are in the group. And so click members, and there are none, right? So I'm going to show you the corresponding config manager collection where this particular group is identified as one that I want to synchronize to. And then the question on the table, which I'll answer later, is why is this not synchronizing? Why is my device that's in my collection not synchronizing, right? But then if I go to groups and look at demo config manager sync 2, again, you'll see that I have an owner here. And then if you look at members, in fact, I have two members here, right? And so this one is working. The other one is not working. Why, right? Why is that the case? And so now, let's turn the page and go over to the config manager side and make sure that we kind of see how that's set up. So if I go to config manager and look at the two collections, I've got two. One of them is here, collections group AAD sync fails, so you know that I am intending that that fails, and in fact it does, and then this one. So if I look over here and look in the sync group at the members, you'll see that I have two members. Those are the same ones I saw up in Azure AD, so you know this is working. If you look at the properties of this and see what the Cloud Sync says, it is replicating to demo config manager sync 2, right? Now, if I go to fail, I indeed do have a collection member. If I look at the properties, you will see that it is configured to replicate to demo group 1. So the question on the table is, okay, it all looks configured the same. Why are we not getting one collection, or why are we getting one collection synchronized and not the other? And then the question is, are we really failing here? Or is the synchronization happening, but it's just not putting a member up in the group, right? And so I'll answer that and tell you the synchronization is working perfectly for both collections. It's just not putting a member up in Azure AD group for one of them for a reason. And I'll explain that reason to you as we go along. You might even know what it is already, right? All right. So the other thing is, remember, you need to understand that when we have this synchronization, Config Manager becomes the authority for this synchronization. So let me go back to this collection for a minute. I have two devices. Well, I'm going to go into my Endpoint Manager environment, and I'm going to add a member. Don't really care what it is. I'll just put something in there, lab server, let's do that one, right? I'm going to add it to this group, right? Okay, great, it's added to the group. We're happy as a clam, right? Well, are we? Let's see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and force a full synchronization, right? And where is it? Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong node. That happens. I need to go to device collections, and then here, and then now I see synchronized membership, right? So I'm forcing a full sync. Now this will take maybe a couple of minutes, so we'll just pull back in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center and refresh this occasionally until we see it go away. Actually, while I'm waiting for it to go away, I will just look at the log, right? Because there is a log that records all of this. And I'll remind you of this again near the end, but it is a log in 2002 forward called collection AAD group sync worker. And so I'm going to look at this. I probably should open it up in trace. Let's see, let me put it up in trace. Open with trace. All right. So this is a very useful log to understand what's happening with the process. If there's a failure, you will see it here, right? But what you see is, hey, I'm just doing a sync succeeded, here's the watermark, here's the watermark, here's the watermark showing what we've done. And so there are no failures here. Everything is syncing correctly. In fact, we may need to wait a little bit to see what actually happened when I did the full sync, but I've done that before. And here's an example of doing a full sync previously. Let me just pause this, right? I believe it's previously. Yeah, it is definitely previously. So what I did when I did a full sync is we're going to, hey, get group members. All right, here's our members. We're going to ignore this device because it's already present up in Azure AD. We're going to ignore this one. It's already present up in Azure AD. Sync successful. Actually, that is a sync, but it's not the one I wanted. I think, yeah, here's the one right above that I want, right? Ignore, I added a device like I just did, delete it, because it's not present in the collection, so I'm going to delete it from Azure AD, and because why? Because Configuration Manager is the authority for the membership of that group, right? So it looks like it's taking a moment here. Let me try to trigger another sync and see if it makes it go any faster. Real quick on this. And synchronize membership. Yes, I want to continue. All right, let's see when this might roll. Either way, you saw what's going to happen when we do it. So it's probably in the middle of a cycle, and Murphy's Law for me says it will take about 15 minutes to happen. But we'll check back in on that when it does. But you already see in the log what is expected to happen, right? Okay, I'll refresh just for good measure, but I bet it's not corrected yet. Nope, it's not. But it will be in a minute. What was that? Refresh, nope. It will be in a minute, right? Okay, so starting to round down to troubleshooting tips and tricks, right? So in terms of logs, I just showed you the collection Azure AD group sync worker. There is another SMS Azure AD discovery for your user discovery and so on, right? In 1910 and before, all of the detail was in this log. But as of 2002, we've split out the sync into its own log. And so it makes it easier to troubleshoot, right? And then another question as we move into the next slide that I had for you is, okay, how do we know what happened, right? Why did that one collection with a member fail to validate or to replicate up into Azure AD? Well, that's a good question. So let me show you what it looks like as we troubleshoot through and want to see things that are healthy. Here's an example of a query that you can run, right? And so be careful because these are single quotes, right? In the documentation where I lifted this, there's a really good blog article out there. As I'm talking, I forget who wrote it, but it's a very good blog article talking about troubleshooting tips in terms of this particular capability. So I lifted this query out of that, and if you copy and paste it from there, you're going to need to reformat these single quotes so that they work in SQL, right? Because it will be an invalid character in SQL by doing that, right? So you run this query, and you get back this line here, right? And then if you click on this, you're going to get an XML blob that will look very similar to this. And this will indicate to you, if you have something similar to this, that your tenant is registered correctly. And so you should have no issues as a result of having the tenant registered improperly, right? So the next question is then, I've already mentioned this, that we need to see in order to know whether devices or users are going to be eligible for sync, then we need to, in this case, look at devices and make sure that the Azure AD tenant ID has been processed or added to the client key data table. Now, there's a number of columns in here, so I focused on SMS ID, Azure AD tenant ID, Azure AD device ID. And here's the point, right? This has to be present. If this is not present, then your device is not going to synchronize whenever we try to do the sync. Doesn't mean synchronization is broken. It just means that we have not recorded the Azure AD tenant ID associated with the device, so it's not eligible to sync yet. Now, there could be some reasons that things are not getting here, and so it would be troubleshooting of your discovery process and what's out there and so on that I'm not going to get into here. But I do want you to know that if this tenant ID is not present, you're not synchronizing. And so then the question is, or those devices aren't synchronizing. So then the question is, how do we figure out what device is being associated with this particular ID? And that's easy. This is the SMS ID. And so once we can correlate back to the SMS ID, if we want to know what these three are, then it's just a simple matter of going over and running a query in system disk and then honing in on the GUID, and then we'll map over from there and find out the machine name, right? So that's pretty easy to find out. And so there are two desktop machine names with desktop in them that are replicating. I forget which one of the other ones it is, but this one is definitely one of them, right? Okay, so now if we know this, then we know that the other device that's in my collection is not replicating because it does not have the device ID. Well, why does it not have the device ID? Well, we can go look in Configuration Manager and let's see, right? So if I go to my demo collection that's failing, then I know the device is 10-1D. If I look in my device list and I add my Azure AD tenant ID, that's device ID, let me add tenant ID as columns. Here's my device, 1D. I do not have this information. Why do I not have this information? Because in my lab, in this case, this is a device that is only a Configuration Manager client. It is it's not in Azure AD. It's not being co-managed or anything else with Intune. It is purely a Config Manager client. So that detail would never be populated. This device is never going to be discovered. Whenever we try to discover and add these details, because it's not present in Azure AD. So it totally makes sense why in fact that is the case here. Let me check back in on my log real quick. Looks like we just did our sync. So we deleted our device, which now if we go back to our Azure or our Endpoint Manager Admin Center and do a refresh, now that device will be gone, right? As easy as that. Okay, now the other thing that I want to mention to you in terms of troubleshooting is we do require either enhanced HTTP or SSL. If those are not enabled, this will not work. The syncs will fail, right? So how do we know that those are enabled? How do we troubleshoot that? Well, there's really a couple of ways or a couple of places to look. And the first is to make sure on your site that you in fact have enhanced HTTP configured and or PKI. So if I go to properties, in my case is enhanced HTTP, communications security, turning this on enables enhanced HTTP, and this only is available whenever you're in HTTPS or HTTP mode. And then that's one place. And then you also need to make sure that you have the management point configured correctly. So let's go look at the management point. Right. So the management point would be here, and it would need to be set for the one that's proper. So HTTP is fine because I'm using enhanced HTTP. This would be for PKI, right? And then we also want to make sure that the certificate required for enhanced HTTP is provisioned onto the management point website or available on the default website and then usable on the management point website. So if I edit bindings and go to port 443 and edit, then I know that I am configured correctly because this is in place. SMS role SSL certificate is present. That is the self-signed certificate from ConfigMgr that enables port 443 traffic even on an HTTP management point, right? So that's there. And we also have another place that you can kind of look to see if things are going well, and that's in our management insights. So if I scroll down to Management Insights and look at Cloud Services Insights, I'll look at all insights. There's two that will help you. One is devices not uploaded to Azure AD. That will be one. And then another is sites that don't have proper HTTPS configuration. That's another that you can look at, right? Okay, so short journey, well, tips and tricks. Definitely would encourage you to check this out, right? What I've shown you today is driven by ConfigMgr, and I showed you the connection of groups in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center, known also many times by me as the Intune console. And so that might infer this is just a ConfigMgr thing. It's not, right? You will get value out of this as a config manager or Intune admin, or better said, as an endpoint manager admin. But your other teams that use Azure AD groups for different things may also get benefit from it as well. It could be that you will build collections in Configuration Manager Console for your other groups that use Azure AD because they need certain grouping that is not easily done through Azure AD groups by itself, right? So take a look, check it out. Not that hard to put out there. Very, very, very valuable. So with that said, that's it for this session. We will wrap this one and we will see you for part 13.